Welcome and thanks for joining us for part one of our panel discussion. My guests today are Dr. Edward Mays. He's Deputy Assistant Commissioner for Infrastructure and Support Services and the Chief of Enterprise Infrastructure at Customs and Border Protection. Richard Clark is the Chief Technology Officer for U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, and Matt Guilbeault, Product Development Director for the Global Security Products Division at Leidos. And it's good to have you all with us. And let's start with a little scene setting here, if we can, and just give us an idea of what your agency looks like at this current time in terms of your delivery of applications, of data, and other computing services. And let's talk about it in terms of data centers, cloud, and the new word, which is not really that new, but definitely in vogue now, that is edge computing. And Dr. Mays, why don't we start with you?
Well, thank you for the opportunity. I think to level set, looking at CBP, we're a very large, complex organization where we are supporting our nation from the perspective of securing our borders, supporting commerce, and securing air travel. That's a humongous mission. When you look at the amount of travelers that we have per year and securing air travel, the amount of commerce that we support, when I say that, we're looking at about 2.7 trillion a year in imports, 1 trillion a year in exports, $105 billion in duties. And what does that translate to in terms of information technology? That looks something like 40 billion transactions per day. That looks like 28 petabytes of data. That looks like 172 petabytes of data traversing our network, and about 100 million attempts against our network per day. So it's a huge mission, and that's just part of it. Then you look at the border and what's happening there, and the data that has to be used, it has to transverse, and the systems that are out there. So the CBP mission is one that's critically important to our nation. But from an IT perspective, it encompasses everything from data centers to networks, to mobility, to cloud. And I would love to discuss more about the things that we're doing as we go on.
Well, I was going to say, I think people sometimes overlook the fact that Customs and Border Protection, nowadays people are thinking about border protection and so forth because of the news, but that customs piece is pretty big in there too, the first word of your name. And in many ways, you're an economic entity for the country, almost like you could be considered Commerce Department in some sense. And I know you work closely with Commerce. So there's a multi-agency aspect to all of this data and delivery too as well, correct?
Yes, sir. As a matter of fact, I think we're the number 2 revenue producer for the United States behind the IRS. So it's, this agency, this organization is critical to our country. In addition to our physical security, but also our economic security as well.
All right. And Mr. Clark, good to have you with us today. We've got an allied agency that has a lot of footprint across a lot of domains. Give us the landscape of your agency in terms of data delivery, edge, cloud, the rest of it.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm going to be embarrassed and I'm going to show off how I'm the Chief Technology Officer, because I didn't spend a lot of time looking at stats and all the transactions that we do. But, to set the stage where we are on computing services, we have fully exited the DHS data centers. And we did that a number of years ago, and we were fully in on the cloud. What started out as a departmental effort in order to save costs by consolidating component footprints in the data centers, we saw as a huge opportunity to exit from the data centers, and because moving from one zone to another was not going to provide us any real benefit. So we may not quite have been ready for it, but we took it on with gusto, and we're very happy that we are 100% in the cloud now. As far as edge computing, I may be a little too pedantic in my application of the term edge, but I really think that we are trying to bring the edges closer to where we do the compute rather than bring compute to the edges, right? Through the use of technologies like secure access, service edge, and SASE and interconnection services from some of the major telcos, we are making it able so that we can have our geo-diverse cloud infrastructure closer to where we are doing the work. And that's really what we look at, I think, as with our move to the cloud.
So would it be accurate to say that because of the growth of the cloud industry, the instances of physical clouds are becoming numerous enough that they can almost act as edges and you're still in the cloud because of their geographic location as where you need them?
With the interconnection services, they look at themselves as being able to provide any telco provider into any cloud out. And we're in 2 of the major cloud providers now, looking to expand out into the 3rd. And I'm sure there will be others. And our architecture and our infrastructure is well set up so that as we have can better take advantage of services in another offerer's provider, it should be relatively straightforward for us to start taking advantage of those services. We've spent a lot of time getting our infrastructure set up to support that.
Interesting. Okay. And we have some follow-ups, but first I want to hear from Matt Guilbeaud of Leidos, and you look across the federal landscape, really, I guess, across all the civilian agencies at some level. Leidos is, I think there's nobody you don't have a little bit of a footprint in, but what does it look like? What's the state of the art now with respect to how the federal government is using the various delivery options for data and applications?
Sure, thanks, Tom. Well, there's a lot of exciting innovation happening, uniting hardware, software, and cloud to securely connect sensors and systems in complex operational environments. Good example of that is a lot of the scanning equipment that we deployed for CBP at the border is going to generate a lot of data, and that CBP mission is going to need to have the support for the types of decisions that need to be made at the different mission layers. So we think of it in terms of, extending the cloud out to the edge, bridging that gap. We call that edge to cloud. And by doing that, we're enabling sort of a different way to think about decision-making at the different mission layers. You mentioned earlier sort of the geospatial aspect of this conversation. And so we think of it in terms of edge, which would really be at the sensor or scanning system, and then perhaps some sort of on-premise rack, perhaps in a port of entry or in a regional command center, and then up to kind of the traditional cloud enterprise. And then kind of beyond that, we would consider sort of the joint cloud, where perhaps there are multi-agency joint efforts occurring. So that's kind of the lay of the land as we see it. Definitely focused on extending services, compute and store down to the edge to support capabilities, real-time, immediate data analysis capabilities, sometimes in remote disconnected environments. And then on the other end of the spectrum, supporting really this much higher level joint capability, enabling interagency sharing and reach back.
So, Richard, let me ask you a little bit more detail about what ICE is doing then. If you're 100% in the cloud, what does it look like from the standpoint of an individual location where some, at least data entry would happen with, in the attempt to reach an application and get an answer back, just to put it in simple terms? Do you even have those local racks and that kind of thing for, if nothing else, terminal controls or that type of application?
Well, we have fewer and fewer of those. By moving to the interconnected technologies and the SASE, we're able to get better bandwidth into more of our locations where the infrastructure is. We do a lot of larger data analytic products, so there isn't necessarily a lot of data entry per se, but we rely heavily on data feeds and things that are seized and ingested in order to do analytics. The network infrastructure used to be very expensive and very few providers of it for the federal government. And I think the way the industry is moving, we're able to use more commercial infrastructure in a secure way in order to provide better connectivity. I think COVID did a lot to help that as well. We're seeing tremendous remote work in addition to the edge for mission support as well as the business.
All right. And I want to come back to you, Ed Mays, and just talk about briefly the telecommunications aspect of tying all of this together. The automated commercial environment, for example, goes back many years and it's had iterations of applications in the decades before that. And as the application has changed and become more data intensive and more capable, and I know it's kind of a never ending effort for CBP to work on that particular central core application. How has the telecom question changed? That is just for lack of a better word, the wiring among locations that carries the data to the cloud and so forth, because we heard about cloud to cloud interconnection that is taken care of by the commercial clouds. But at some point, you've got to get from here to there.
That's a really great question. I will tell you that we've been thinking about this for a long time, right? And part of this has to do with our ICPs, right? Our connection points to the cloud. And we've worked really arduously, if you will, in terms of ensuring that we get not just the ACE program or our programs, but bringing all of our comms up into our ICP. So, and we're getting there. We think we're about a year out, maybe a little more, but that gives us a lot more control. We're also using, broadband providers as well, right? Instead of buying a lot of, circuits like we used to, we're able to really leverage the circuits that are already in place, for the basic customer and driving down cost ultimately. So that's one of the big efforts that we've got internal to CBP. We're looking at how do we make communications an enterprise service, because to be honest, when I arrived here, one of the things I quickly noticed that the way we did those circuits in our comms was literally kind of by I'll call it disjointed incrementalism, and we kind of moved away from that, and we're moving to an enterprise approach. This is huge for us, right? Because as we were talking about data on the edge, that allows us to drive down, whether it's on our circuitry or a point of presence by one of the major cloud providers, and get us even closer to that edge, wherever it may be. And one of the bigger ones that we always look at currently is the southwest border, and being able to deliver data to our customers and our stakeholders that are there. And this has made a huge difference. I mean, we work very closely with ICE, by the way. And this has been a great effort that's benefited both organizations. So the telecommunications aspect of this has grown, we've matured, and the architecture is absolutely essential in understanding, how all these elements, applications, the networks, and everything work together.
All right. And I wanted to ask everyone here too about the idea of let's say, the mission applications, of which there are multiple ones for each of your agencies. And then the functions that every agency has in common, those are also critical applications. Let's call those enterprise applications, like whether it's ERP or financial management, HR, those kinds of things. Crucial, but they're not deployed out there to the operators of the mission. So making that distinction, what are the subtleties or what are the challenges, or how are you supporting those two types of mission applications, if you will, mission and agency operational applications through the cloud? And are there ways that you approach it differently for public facing or mission facing versus internally focused line of business type of applications? Mr. Clark?
So one thing that I will say is we've spent a lot of time over the last year or three trying to make more discrete small services that meet the specific needs of the mission business that can be deployed utilizing cloud native technologies that rapidly meet their needs. We call them the micro apps. So we will take a workflow or part of a workflow out of an existing legacy application and make certain that it is implemented in a very effective way, utilizing cloud native technologies where it can dynamically scale, have great resiliency, and meet some urgent business needs, right? There was a lot of concern with the repeal of Title 42 and the amount of workload that may happen on the southern border. So we spent a lot of time looking at expediting small business processes in a cloud native way, such that the operators could more rapidly process the individuals that needed to be processed. Now, thankfully, it didn't turn into a huge event, but we continue to utilize that approach to simplify and better service enables in a cloud-friendly manner these services. That gives us the ability to shrink the cost as well for these applications. Rather than running large infrastructure continuously to support all of the functional needs that you would ever need, these applications in the infrastructure, whether it is serverless or utilizing containers, is able to scale dynamically up and down to the actual workload. So that's what we're doing in the mission space in order to help that is particular to the cloud and the edge.
So you're using what might be called a lot of agility and a lot of small development, incremental types of cycles to create these services that are very mission specific.
Yes, we've adopted agile technology, agile approach, SecDevOps as they like to call it, because security comes first, to make certain that we can put out small incremental improvements and or applications that meet the needs of the business without having to wait for a big bang deployment multiple years out.
Because that's, goes to challenge the idea that in order to get to the cloud, which a lot of agencies discovered they had to do some rationalization of their application and kill off a bunch of them. And one way was to do that was to turn them off and see who screams. And then you get down to the applications you really need. So can you avoid application proliferation with this approach? That is to say, can you be equally agile about killing one off if the need has come and gone, and yet the logic might still be there for the future, as you said, embedded in a larger application that's ongoing?
Well, when we moved to the cloud, I don't know that we did a lot of killing off. We did get some cost savings by going to the cloud, even though we predominantly did a lift and shift. We still have many opportunities to improve the architectures of our applications there. And you make a fair point. There is a concern that you will continue to consume as much compute capability that is out there. But our leadership really wants us to look and work like a small startup, even though we're a large government agency. Sometimes it's a little better to take a risk, a well-informed risk, and meet a new need and ask for forgiveness later, or fix some of those less interesting aspects later. And I'm certain that there will be some of that, but we want to make certain that we're delivering value and services to our customers, both the employees as well as the non-citizens that we interact with.
Yeah, in the end, it's only code, which is easily disposed of. It's not like a bunch of hardware you had to buy for a mission that didn't go anywhere.
Exactly.
And Dr. Mays, same question.
Well, first of all, I'd just like to say, with respect to the cloud, we are about 68% in the cloud now. And that's, all of our apps, about 186 or so out of 277. And we have not done lift and shifts, right? We did a rationalization up front, decided what we wanted to get rid of, what we wanted to combine, and then we started, refactoring. And so we're still in the middle of some of that. And the other thing is, right, we also had to do that cost benefit trade-off. We could move a lot faster. We still have some applications that are sitting in our remaining data center, which is we're hoping to close by the end of calendar year 25. They're sitting there because that's some cost that we can still move forward on, right? Because once you put it in the cloud, right, you're now paying a new bill, and a bill that you may have not budgeted for, or that may come with some additional cost. And we're actually looking at it from a business perspective. I think everyone's aware of the work that we did for Operation Allies Welcome, where we produced brand new apps that supported that entire endeavor, and we were able to do that and make modifications literally within a day or so, getting new capability out to our customers. CBP One, which has been in the news quite a bit, right? Most recently, in a very positive way, once the app was actually understood. And even unified processing as well, which helps us to process people at the border, which is being used. I think some of the data is being consumed by ICE as well, and others. But I mean, and if you look also at the traditional back office apps, things that support the overall business enterprise, right? We're taking the same perspective with migrating those. And those applications get prioritized as we're planning to move them forward. The coolest thing I think, though, about all of this is, the value that we're delivering. And the value is delivered because we can deliver a high quality application very, very fast. And so, in the cloud operations I run, we have, standardized CI/CD pipelines, right? We are also doing the same thing with AI/ML, RPA, and data on the edge as well. And so I think that the lessons that we learned starting right around 2017 through 2020 are paying big benefits and dividends for us in the current time. And I just see it just getting brighter.
All right. And before we go to the break here and for this panel, I just wanted to make sure we heard also one more time from Matt. And looking again across government, what are some of the best practices right now in terms of supporting, on the one hand, the mission related direct applications and those back office, many of which can be shared services in some instances?
Well, I think you've heard it from my colleagues on the panel. I mean, from our perspective, we have to have alignment with our customer environments. And in some cases, those are legacy environments that may be undergoing modernization, or that in some cases we are working with them to modernize. And so it's sort of the adage of, walking and chewing gum at the same time. Beyond that, I think you heard a couple of times, this concept of fastest time to value. I think that's a very important tenet here, that it's not necessarily what any one person wants, but it's what the agency values and the results that generates. And then there's the standard, boilerplate, cost-effective, incrementally scalable, deployment management, troubleshooting of that infrastructure needs to be simple and resilient with rapid recovery and minimal downtime.
All right. I want to reintroduce our guest before we go to the break here, so you know who we're talking to. We have been speaking with Dr. Ed Mays. He's Deputy Assistant Commissioner for Infrastructure and Support Services at Customs and Border Protection. Richard Clark is the Chief Technology Officer for U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement. And Matt Guilbeault, he is Product Development Director for the Global Security Products Division at Leidos. I'm Tom Temin. We're going to take a pause here. We'll be back after a brief industry perspective and back to the studio now for more of the Cloud Exchange.